Thio Chin Loo. She's Senior Analyst at BNP Paribas and live on the line from Singapore. Chin Loo, good to see you. Thanks for coming on the program today. I want to get your overall take on Asian currencies this year as you look broadly at the spectrum of currencies here. Which ones are best positioned to benefit?
Yeah, we have been fairly positive on Asian currencies since last year, and I think the trends should very much stay intact for this year. Our forecasts are really based on the fact that Asian growth will outperform those of the G3, and given the diversification theme of portfolio managers to overweight Asia now, it clearly will have beneficial effect in terms of fund flows into Asian markets and therefore supporting Asian currencies. Of those Asian currencies that we like, some of the high yield plays, I think it will do fairly well. The Rupiah comes to mind, where both with high yields as well as relative political stability as compared to a high yield country like Philippines, the currency still does look fairly attractive. We do think that some of these underperformers, for example, the won, even though it's performed quite well last year, it still looks relatively cheap, particularly against some of its major competitors like Japan. So I think the won as well looks a fairly attractive bet within the Asian region. And the other currency that we like quite a lot as well is the Ringgit, where we think it's likely to play catch-up. And given Malaysia's current theme to attract foreign investments, that should as well benefit the ringgit.
And you mentioned the Korean won. Obviously, all eyes on what the central bank will do there in Korea. How do you expect the Bank of Korea to move forward on interest rate policy, and how will that be obviously beneficial to the won?
Well, I think clearly Korean economic growth is normalizing, and with that, we expect as well the BOK to move towards tightening monetary policy. However, as we've seen for the first meeting of the year that was just passed, the BOK failed to raise interest rates as it cited global economic concerns and that inflation is still very well managed. But I think moving on, given that growth in Korea is likely to be fairly strong, if the BOK waits any further, that could put it well behind the curve and lead to asset bubbles building within Korea. So I think in terms of rates, we do see some chances for opportunistic receivers in the very near term, but further out, we do think that rates should normalize, i.e. the BOK should start hiking interest rates.
Curious what steps you see governments in the region taking to maintain export competitiveness against the backdrop of perhaps a potential jump in inflation. Of course, inflation, the big keyword everyone's looking at right now.
Well, I think currently we have had export rebounds across Asia, but central banks continue to act with caution because obviously the major markets, primarily in the U.S., is still not up to speed, and therefore, the push on to exports could still be fairly weak. So that's a main concern for central banks. So whilst Asian currencies continue to appreciate against the U.S. dollar, we've continued intervention by central banks to slow the pace of appreciation. All that is fine and dandy with inflation still fairly subdued, but we know that asset inflation is making its rounds across Asia, and central banks are watching that fairly closely. So I think with the asset inflation story within Asia and as well strong oil prices that could as well exert important inflation risk to Asia, central banks may well need to take their foot off the pedal in terms of central bank interventions and allow currency strength to pull through. So I think it is kind of a work in progress for central banks trying to fine-tune the balance between growth and inflation and to what degree they should come into the markets to try to slow the pace of Asian currency appreciation.
Chin Loo, I want to get on to one more of your picks, which is the Indonesian Rupiah. It's been another top performer, of course. How much further upside do you see for the Rupiah?
Well, I think the story for Indonesia is still quite appealing. The yield story is still very attractive, and given our view that the BI will likely be quite modest in terms of its rate hikes, it should not unsettle the bond markets too much. So I've seen a very big appetite from foreign investors to pour money into Indonesian bond markets. On the equity front as well, Indonesian equities have been a target for many portfolio managers, given the resource play as well that's prevalent in the country. So all in, we're seeing a good picture of of fund inflows into Indonesia. And in terms of the growth story as well, I think given the diversification into resources, Indonesia remains a fairly well-diversified economy, which continues to perform quite well. So I think the variety of these factors will continue to keep the rupiah fairly strong, and we have our targets for dollar rupiah to hit below 9,000 by the end of this year.
Chin Loo, we've got to leave our chat there. Thanks so much for coming on the program today. That's Chin Loo Thio of BNP Paribas.